I lost everything. Those 4 words fell across my dining room table like a bomb, and I watched my wife Victoria's face transform from loving concern to cold calculation in less than 3 seconds. But it was James, our family butler for 15 years, who quietly refilled my water glass and whispered, "More tea, sir?" Like nothing had changed. That moment taught me more about human nature than 15 years of building a tech empire ever could. If you've ever wondered who really loves you versus who loves what you can provide, if you've ever felt like your bank account was more important to people than your heart, settle in close. Because tonight's story is about the most expensive lesson I never paid for, and the cheapest gesture that was worth everything. And if you appreciate tales about loyalty, betrayal, and the surprising places you find real love, hit that subscribe button for Grandpa's Diaries. Trust me, I've got stories that'll make you question everyone at your next family gathering. It was a crisp October evening in our Buckhead mansion, the kind of night where Atlanta's elite gather around polished mahogany tables to discuss success stories and investment portfolios. I'd planned this dinner for weeks, inviting my wife Victoria, my siblings Regina and David, and my mother Eleanor. The table was set with our finest china, crystal glasses catching the light from our chandelier, and James had prepared his signature herb-crusted salmon that usually had everyone fighting for seconds. At 45, I'd built Technova Solutions from a garage startup into a company worth $200 million. Every person at that table had benefited from my success. Victoria's designer wardrobe, Regina's law practice that I'd financially backed, David's real estate ventures that I'd invested in, and my mother's comfortable retirement in her dream home that I'd purchased. But lately I'd been feeling like a walking ATM machine rather than a family member. The conversation that evening followed its usual script. Victoria discussing her latest charity event planning, Regina complaining about her caseload while hinting at needing another loan, David bragging about his latest property flip that I'd helped finance. Everyone was performing their roles perfectly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if my money disappeared tomorrow, so would their affection. That's when I decided to conduct the most important experiment of my life. James moved around the table with his usual quiet dignity, anticipating everyone's needs before they voiced them. He'd been with our family since I first made serious money, hired initially as household help, but becoming something closer to a trusted advisor and friend. While everyone else at the table took his service for granted, I'd always noticed how James treated every family member with the same respect, regardless of their mood or demands. I cleared my throat and looked around the table at the faces of people I'd loved and supported for years. "I need to tell you all something important," I began, my heart pounding despite knowing this was all an elaborate lie. The tech market crashed harder than anyone expected, and some bad investments. Well, I lost everything. The company's bankrupt, the house is going into foreclosure, and I'm essentially broke. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the gentle clink of James setting down the water pitcher with the same careful precision he'd maintained for 15 years. Before that night changed everything, I was the family hero, the success story everyone loved to claim. Victoria used to introduce me at social events as my brilliant husband who turned code into gold, her arm linked through mine like she was anchoring herself to my achievements. Those early years after Technova took off were magical. Private jets to weekend getaways, spontaneous shopping trips to Paris, and the look of pure adoration in Victoria's eyes when I'd surprise her with jewelry that cost more than most people's cars. Regina used to call me her baby brother superhero back when I first started making serious money. She'd struggled through law school on student loans while I was still coding in my cramped apartment. But once Technova exploded, I made sure her dreams became reality. I paid off her law school debt, helped her lease office space in downtown Atlanta, and even hired her firm for all my company's legal work. Sunday family dinners back then were filled with her gratitude and excitement about cases she was winning with the confidence my support had given her. David, my older brother, had always been the charmer of the family, quick with jokes and big dreams but slow on execution. When I started succeeding, he suddenly became my biggest cheerleader, showing up at company events with stories about how he'd always known I'd make it big. I invested in his first real estate venture, then his second, then helped him start his own firm. Marcus believes in family, he'd tell potential clients, using my success to build his credibility in Atlanta's competitive real estate market. My mother Eleanor deserved every penny I spent on her comfort. She'd worked double shifts as a nurse for 30 years, sacrificing her own dreams to keep food on our table and books in our hands. The day I bought her that beautiful house in Druid Hills, watching her cry tears of joy as she walked through rooms she'd only dreamed of owning, remains one of my proudest moments. She'd earned her luxury retirement through decades of putting her children first. Victoria and I were the golden couple of Atlanta's Black professional scene, featured in magazines and invited to every important social gathering. She'd given up her marketing career when my money made her job optional, channeling her energy into charity work and social climbing. I loved watching her plan elaborate fundraising events, seeing her excitement when her efforts resulted in significant donations for causes she cared about. She made my success feel meaningful beyond just numbers in bank accounts. James entered our lives during those early flush years, recommended by another successful family in Buckhead. From day one, he treated his role with a dignity that elevated everyone around him. He remembered every family member's preferences, birthdays, and important events without being asked. While other wealthy families I knew struggled with staff turnover, James became part of our foundation, the steady presence that made our house feel like a home. Family gatherings in those days felt like celebrations, everyone genuinely happy to be together, sharing victories and supporting each other through challenges. I felt like the patriarch of a close-knit clan, using my resources to lift everyone up and create opportunities for shared success. The money felt like a tool for building stronger family bonds, not the foundation those bonds were built on. Looking back, I realize I was confusing gratitude with love, dependence with loyalty. The first sign that something was wrong with my family dynamics came during a business downturn 2 years ago. Technova hit a rough patch, not bankruptcy, just a temporary dip in profits that meant tightening our budget for a few months. When I mentioned to Victoria that we should postpone her planned kitchen renovation, her reaction shocked me. "But I already told the design committee at the club about the project," she said, her voice taking on a sharp edge I'd never heard before. That conversation revealed a side of Victoria I hadn't noticed during our flush years. She wasn't concerned about the business challenges I was facing or the stress keeping me awake at night. Her focus was entirely on how the delay might affect her social standing, her ability to host the kind of elaborate dinner parties that had become her signature. "People expect certain things from us, Marcus," she explained. "Like our marriage was a performance for Atlanta's social elite, rather than a partnership between two people who loved each other." Regina's transformation was more subtle but equally troubling. During that same rough patch, she stopped calling just to check in, and our conversations became increasingly focused on her financial needs. When I had to delay one of her loan payments by a month, she hired another firm to handle a major case, claiming she needed more diversified legal representation. The message was clear: my financial support bought her loyalty, and any interruption in that support meant an immediate reassessment of our relationship. David's shift was perhaps the most painful because it came wrapped in concern. He started offering unsolicited business advice, suggesting I was being too conservative with investments, too soft with employees, too focused on long-term stability instead of short-term profits. "You're not the hungry entrepreneur who built this company," he told me over lunch one day. But his advice always seemed designed to ensure my continued success, rather than genuinely help me navigate challenges. Even family dinners began feeling different during that temporary downturn. Conversations that used to flow naturally became stilted, with everyone seeming to calculate the cost of their requests before speaking. Regina stopped mentioning her legal victories and started talking about her expenses. David's real estate stories focused more on deals he couldn't afford to pursue without additional backing. Victoria grew quiet when friends discussed their latest luxury purchases. The only person whose behavior remained unchanged was James. During those tighter months when I had to let go of the landscaping service and reduce some household expenses, James simply adjusted without complaint. He took on additional responsibilities, maintained the same level of service, and never once made me feel like our family's temporary financial constraints were a personal inconvenience to him. His consistency stood in stark contrast to everyone else's subtle but noticeable shifts in attitude. It was during this period that I began questioning whether my family loved Marcus the person or Marcus the provider. Late nights in my home office, wrestling with business decisions and feeling isolated despite being surrounded by people who supposedly cared about me, I started planning the test that would eventually reveal the truth. I needed to know if the foundation of my family relationships was built on genuine affection or financial dependency, because the difference would determine how I moved forward with my life. Victoria's reaction to my fake bankruptcy announcement was swift and devastating. The loving concern I'd expected never appeared. Instead, her face cycled through shock, anger, and what I can only describe as disgust before settling on cold fury. "How could you let this happen?" she hissed, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more violent than shouting. "Do you have any idea what this means for my reputation? For the charity board positions I've worked years to get?" Not once did she ask if I was okay, if I needed emotional support, or how we could work through this together. Her immediate concern was calculating the social cost of being married to a failed businessman. "I have the Magnolia Society fundraiser next month," she continued, her hands gesturing frantically. "I'm supposed to be hosting a table for 10. How am I supposed to explain that my husband lost our fortune to bad investments?" The word "our" stung particularly hard since Victoria had never risked a penny of her own money on any business venture. Regina's response was more measured but equally revealing. She set down her wine glass with deliberate precision and said, "Marcus, I hope you understand that I'll need to explore other options for my legal practice financing. This changes everything about our business relationship. No expression of sympathy, no offer to help brainstorm solutions. Just an immediate severing of financial ties wrapped in professional language." My sister was already calculating how to distance herself from the sinking ship. David at least tried to maintain a facade of brotherly concern, but his words betrayed his true priorities. "Jesus, Marcus, how bad is it? Can you at least cover the loan I took out for the Midtown property development?" When I shook my head, claiming I couldn't even cover my own mortgage, his face went pale. "I put my personal credit on the line based on your backing. You've potentially ruined my business too." Like my fictional financial disaster was something I'd done to hurt him personally. My mother, Eleanor, bless her heart, was the only family member who approached with genuine concern. She reached across the table and took my hand, her eyes filling with tears. "Baby, we'll figure this out. Money comes and goes, but family is forever." Her words were exactly what I'd hoped to hear from my wife. And hearing them from my mother while Victoria sat coldly calculating her exit strategy made my chest feel tight with a mixture of gratitude and heartbreak. But it was James who provided the moment that would change everything. As my family members continued their various reactions, Victoria planning damage control, Regina protecting her interests, David calculating his losses, James quietly approached my chair. "Sir, would you care for more tea?" he asked in the same respectful tone he'd used for 15 years. When I looked up at him, confused by the normalcy of his request, he met my eyes and added softly, "Financial circumstances don't change the quality of a man's character, Mr. Thompson." The contrast was staggering. My wife of 12 years was already mentally planning her escape from our marriage. My siblings were focused on protecting their own financial interests, while my employee, a man I paid to serve my family, was the only person treating me with unchanged dignity and respect. James continued clearing dishes and refilling glasses as if nothing had changed, because for him, nothing had. He wasn't serving my bank account. He was serving me as a human being. Sitting there watching my family's true priorities reveal themselves while James maintained his quiet dignity, I realized the experiment had succeeded beyond my worst fears. The people I'd loved and supported for years were already abandoning ship, while the man I'd hired to work in my house was demonstrating the kind of loyalty I'd foolishly expected from my own blood relatives. The days following my fake bankruptcy announcement revealed the true nature of my relationships with surgical precision. Victoria moved into the guest bedroom that very night, claiming she needed space to process what my financial failure meant for our future. She spent hours on the phone with her mother and sisters, their conversations filled with legal terminology about asset protection and divorce proceedings. I could hear fragments through the walls, discussions about prenups, property division, and how quickly she could disentangle herself from my supposed financial disaster. Regina called 2 days later with a formal tone I'd never heard her use with family. "Marcus, I've consulted with my partners, and we've decided it's best to transition your account to another firm. Given the circumstances, continuing our business relationship could create conflicts of interest." She'd prepared a professional speech to fire her own brother, complete with legal language designed to protect her reputation while abandoning mine. 20 years of supporting her dreams, erased in a 5-minute phone call. David's reaction was perhaps the most painful, because he tried to maintain the pretense of family loyalty while systematically protecting his own interests. He visited the house that weekend, ostensibly to offer support, but spent most of the time subtly interrogating me about which assets might be recoverable, which creditors had priority claims, and whether any of our joint investments could be salvaged. "I'm just trying to understand the full scope," he kept saying, but his questions revealed a man calculating how to minimize his own losses rather than support his struggling brother. The social invitations stopped immediately. Victoria's charity board meeting suddenly had scheduling conflicts. David's real estate networking events were postponed indefinitely, and Regina's legal community gatherings no longer included +1s for family members. Atlanta's elite social circle, which had embraced us during our successful years, closed ranks against financial failure with practiced efficiency. We went from being the golden couple everyone wanted to associate with to pariahs whose misfortune might be contagious. James, meanwhile, continued his daily routines as if nothing had changed. He prepared my morning coffee with the same care, maintained the house with the same attention to detail, and treated every family member with unchanged respect, despite their obvious preparations to abandon ship. When Victoria snapped at him about unnecessary expenses like fresh flowers for the dining room, James simply nodded and said, "Of course, ma'am. I'll adjust the household budget accordingly." I found myself spending more time in conversations with James than with my own family members. While Victoria, Regina, and David were busy protecting themselves from my fictional downfall, James was the only person who asked how I was handling the stress, whether I needed anything, if there was any way he could help navigate the challenges ahead. His concern felt genuine because it was focused on my well-being rather than his own financial security. The isolation was profound. Sitting in my study each evening, surrounded by the trappings of success that no longer impressed anyone in my family, I felt more alone than I had during my struggling startup days. Back then, Victoria had been my partner in building dreams. Now she was planning her exit strategy. My siblings, who had benefited from my generosity for years, were treating me like a liability to be managed rather than a brother to be supported. But James remained constant, a steady presence in a house full of people preparing to leave. His loyalty wasn't based on what I could provide for him. It was rooted in mutual respect and genuine human connection. Watching him maintain his dignity and service while my family members calculated their escape routes taught me more about character than 15 years of business success ever had. 2 weeks into my fake bankruptcy experiment, I couldn't bear watching James continue his loyal service while my family prepared to abandon me. He deserved to know the truth, especially since his unwavering dignity had taught me more about genuine character than years of business dealings with supposedly sophisticated people. I found him in the kitchen early one morning preparing breakfast with the same meticulous care he'd maintained throughout the family crisis, and I knew it was time to confess. "James, I need to tell you something important," I said, sitting at the kitchen counter where we'd shared countless conversations over the years. "The bankruptcy, it's not real. I made it up to test my family's loyalty." His hands never paused in their breakfast preparations, but I saw a small smile cross his face. "I wondered about that, sir," he said quietly. "A man doesn't lose everything overnight and remain as calm as you've been. Plus, the business accounts I helped manage for household expenses never showed any irregularities." James's response to learning about my deception revealed even more about his character. Instead of anger at being included in my family experiment, he expressed understanding about why I'd felt the need to test people's motivations. "Wealth has a way of attracting people who love what you can provide rather than who you are," he said, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who'd observed human nature from a unique vantage point for decades. We talked for over an hour that morning, and James shared insights about my family that he'd observed but never voiced. He'd noticed Victoria's increasing focus on social status over personal connection, Regina's transactional approach to our sibling relationship, and David's tendency to treat family gatherings as networking opportunities. "I've worked for several wealthy families, Mr. Thompson, and I've learned to recognize the difference between people who happen to have money and people who've been changed by having money." What struck me most was James's genuine concern for my emotional well-being throughout this experiment. While my family had been focused on protecting themselves from my fictional financial disaster, James had been quietly worried about the psychological toll of watching people you love reveal their true priorities. "It takes courage to seek truth when you suspect it might hurt," he said. "But it takes wisdom to decide what to do with that truth once you have it." James then shared something that floored me completely. "Sir, if I may speak freely, I've been saving money for years with the hope of eventually opening a small catering business. When I believed you were facing real financial troubles, I was prepared to offer you a loan from my savings. Not because you're my employer, but because you've always treated me with dignity and respect." Here was a man making a fraction of my income, ready to risk his life savings to help someone he believed was in genuine need. The contrast between James's offer and my family's reactions crystallized everything I'd learned from this experiment. My wife was consulting divorce lawyers. My siblings were protecting their financial interests, while my employee was prepared to give up his retirement savings to help me through a crisis. The people I'd elevated through my success were abandoning me at the first sign of trouble, while the man I'd hired to serve my household was demonstrating the kind of loyalty I'd foolishly expected from my own blood relatives. That morning conversation with James became a turning point in my understanding of relationships, loyalty, and character. He'd shown me that respect and dignity aren't dependent on financial circumstances, that genuine care for another person's well-being transcends economic status, and that sometimes the most authentic relationships exist in the most unexpected places. James hadn't just maintained his professional standards during my fake crisis. He'd revealed himself to be the kind of person I wanted to become. 6 months later, I was sitting in a different house at a smaller table, sharing Sunday dinner with James and his daughter Patricia, who was visiting from medical school. The contrast with my old family dinners was striking. Less expensive china, simpler food, but infinitely more genuine connection. James had become my business partner in his catering venture, and Patricia was telling us about her pediatric residency with the same passion I remembered having for technology before money complicated everything. The revelation of my fake bankruptcy to my family had gone exactly as James predicted it would. Victoria's fury wasn't about being deceived, but about the social embarrassment of having prepared for a divorce that was no longer necessary. She'd moved out anyway, claiming she could never trust someone who would manipulate family relationships for psychological experiments. Regina and David were equally indignant, not because I'd lied, but because their premature abandonment of me had been exposed and made them look calculating and disloyal. My mother Eleanor was the only family member who understood why I'd felt compelled to test everyone's loyalty. "Baby, you needed to know who loved Marcus Thompson the man versus Marcus Thompson the bank account," she said when I confessed the truth. "I'm just sorry the answer broke your heart." She remained in the beautiful house I'd bought her, but our relationship deepened into something more honest and reciprocal than it had been when I was simply the successful son providing for his grateful mother. James and I had launched Patterson Thompson Catering using his culinary expertise and my business experience. Working together revealed why his loyalty had been so unwavering. James approached every relationship, professional or personal, with the same integrity and consistency. He didn't change his behavior based on other people's circumstances because his character wasn't dependent on external factors. Building a business with him taught me more about authentic partnership than years of corporate deals ever had. The divorce from Victoria was finalized quietly, with her keeping the Buckhead mansion and most of the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to through our prenup. But losing that house felt liberating rather than devastating, because it had become a stage for performing success rather than a home for living authentically. My new place was smaller, simpler, and filled with people who valued character over capital, conversations over connections. Regina and David occasionally reached out, usually when they needed something, but I'd learned to recognize the difference between genuine family connection and transactional relationships disguised as love. They'd revealed their true priorities during my fake crisis, and while I'd forgiven them, I'd also adjusted my expectations and boundaries accordingly. Some lessons can only be learned through loss, and they'd lost a brother who was willing to sacrifice everything for family loyalty. The most valuable thing I gained from that fake bankruptcy wasn't knowledge about my family's limitations, but understanding about the kind of man I wanted to be going forward. James had shown me that integrity isn't situational, that respect isn't conditional on financial circumstances, and that the most meaningful relationships are built on mutual regard rather than mutual benefit. He'd maintained his dignity when he thought I'd lost everything, and that example taught me more about character than 15 years of business success ever could. Have you ever tested the people in your life to see who really cares about you versus what you can provide? Have you discovered that sometimes the most genuine relationships exist where you least expect them? Drop a comment below and share your story about finding authentic loyalty in unexpected places. And don't forget to subscribe to Grandpa's Diaries. I've got plenty more tales about discovering who's really in your corner when life strips away everything except character.